In the 4th century before Christ, long before modern history books, before universities, before archives, before historians, there lived a man who decided that stories were too important to be forgotten. He was not a king, he was not a general, he was not a conqueror. He was something far rarer in the ancient world. He was curious. His name was Herodotus. Today we call him the father of history, but he did not begin his life as a legend. He began as a boy, asking questions that nobody else cared to answer. Herodotus was born in 484 BC in the Greek city of Halicarnassus, a wealthy city, a cultured city, a city under foreign rule, because Halicarnassus belonged to the Persian Empire. To understand Herodotus, you must understand the world he was born into. It was a world on fire, east and west, locked in a struggle for dominance, Greeks and Persians watching each other with suspicion, fear, and hatred. Wars were not rare events. Wars were the background noise of life. And when Herodotus was just 5 years old, the impossible happened. The Greeks defeated the Persians at the Battle of Plataea. For most children, this would become a story told at dinner. For Herodotus, it became an obsession. He wanted to know one thing: why? Why were Greeks and non-Greeks always at war? Where did the hatred begin? Who started it? And most importantly, could the truth be found? Most people would have stopped there. Most people accept the stories they are told. Herodotus did not. He wanted evidence. He wanted witnesses. He wanted different versions of the same story. He wanted to see the world with his own eyes. And that decision changed history forever. Because Herodotus did something almost nobody had ever done before. He left home, not to conquer the world, but to understand it. His journey would last nearly a decade. He would visit Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Libya, Arabia, India, the Black Sea, the great cities of Greece, thousands of miles, by ship, by horse, by foot. He would speak to priests, kings, soldiers, merchants, travelers, survivors. He would collect stories the way others collected gold. And unlike the storytellers before him, Herodotus asked a dangerous question after every tale. Is this true? For the first time in human history, someone began separating myth from memory. His journey began in Egypt, the land of the Nile, the land of pyramids, the land older than Greece, older than Persia, older than almost everything known. To the Greeks, Egypt felt eternal, and when Herodotus arrived, he stood before the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure so ancient that even the Egyptians considered it ancient. He spoke to priests. He asked how the pyramids were built, who built them, why they were built, and for the first time, someone wrote their answers down, not as myth, not as legend, but as history. When Herodotus left Egypt, he carried something far more valuable than treasure. He carried stories, and he would not stop until he found the story that explained everything. The story of the war between East and West, the story of the greatest conflict the ancient world had ever seen. That search led him to the Persian Empire, to the royal city of Susa, winter capital of kings, center of power, wealth, and memory. There, Herodotus asked Persians the same question that haunted him since childhood. Why do you hate the Greeks? The Persians did not hesitate. They had an answer ready, an answer older than memory itself. They told him, it all began with a woman. Her name was Io. And with that story, Herodotus realized something shocking. Every civilization believed the other side started the conflict. Everyone believed they were the victims. And for the first time, someone decided to record every side of the story. History had begun. And so the investigation truly began. The Persians told Herodotus that long before the famous wars, long before Xerxes, long before Darius, There had been a chain of kidnappings, a chain of revenge, a chain of pride, and every link pulled the world closer to war. First, the Phoenicians arrived in the Greek city of Argos. They came as traders, merchants, sailors, men who crossed dangerous seas, chasing profit and opportunity. But trade did not remain peaceful. According to the Persians, the Phoenicians kidnapped a princess, Io, daughter of the king of Argos. They carried her across the sea to Egypt. To the Persians, this was the first crime, the first insult, the first spark. Years passed, and the Greeks answered. They sailed to Phoenicia and kidnapped Europa, daughter of a Phoenician king. Revenge had begun. But revenge rarely ends after one act. It grows, it multiplies, it demands balance. The Greeks struck again, sailing east to the distant land of Colchis, where they kidnapped Medea, a foreign princess. Another insult, another scar. Now the score stood 2-1 in favor of the Greeks, and the Persians remembered. Then came Paris of Troy, a prince, a lover, a man whose decision would ignite the most famous war in myth. Paris stole Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in the world. To the Greeks, this was unforgivable. They raised an army, sailed across the sea, destroyed Troy, and the Persians never forgot. This, they told Herodotus, is why we distrust the Greeks. If Herodotus had been like other storytellers, the story would have ended there. But Herodotus did something radical. He asked another question. He asked the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians laughed. They said the women were not kidnapped at all. They said the women left willingly. They said love, desire, and scandal had been turned into war stories. Now Herodotus faced a problem no historian before him had faced. Two civilizations, two versions of the truth, both convinced they were right. For the first time, Herodotus understood something profound. History is not a single story. It is many stories, competing for survival. And so he continued searching, because he believed the true beginning of the conflict was not myth. It was recent, it was real. And it began with a king whose wealth became legendary, a king whose name became a warning, a king named Croesus. Croesus was the ruler of Lydia, a kingdom in western Anatolia, a kingdom rich with gold, a kingdom powerful enough to challenge the Greek cities of Asia Minor. Croesus was not just wealthy, he was believed to be the richest man alive. His capital, Sardis, became a magnet for philosophers, merchants, artists, and travelers. Everyone wanted to see the court of Croesus. Everyone wanted to witness unimaginable wealth. But wealth has a dangerous side. It creates a question, a dangerous question. If you have everything, can you also be the happiest man alive? Croesus believed the answer was yes, until the day he met a traveler from Athens, a lawmaker, a philosopher, a man famous for wisdom, Solon. Croesus welcomed Solon into his palace, showed him gold, showed him jewels, showed him treasures beyond imagination. And finally, he asked the question he had been waiting to ask. Tell me, Solon, who is the happiest man in the world? Croesus expected one answer, his own name. Instead, Solon spoke a different name, Tellus of Athens. The richest man in the world sat in silence, confused, surprised, and slightly insulted. Croesus asked why, and Solon gave an answer that would echo through history. Tellus lived in a prosperous city, raised strong children, saw his grandchildren born, and died heroically in battle. His life ended with honor, his story complete. Croesus forced a smile, then asked another question. Who is the second happiest man? Surely now. Solon would say his name. Surely now, the answer would be corrected. But Solon spoke two names, two brothers, Cleobus and Iton. Young men who honored their mother pulled her chariot miles to a temple and were celebrated by their people. That night, they died peacefully in their sleep, their lives perfect and complete. Croesus could not hide his frustration. He asked Solon directly, "Do you consider my happiness worthless?" And Solon answered with words that would haunt Croesus forever. "No man can be called happy until he is dead." Croesus dismissed him. He thought the philosopher foolish. He thought the lesson meaningless. He thought fortune would last forever. He was wrong. Not long after Solon left Sardis, Croesus had a dream, a terrible dream. He saw his beloved son killed by a spear. Croesus woke in terror. Kings could command armies, build cities, gather gold, but they could not command fate. He had two sons. One could not speak. The other, Atys, was everything a king could hope for. Strong, brave, loved by the people, heir to the throne. Croesus decided the dream must be stopped. He removed weapons from the palace, kept his son away from war, rushed to arrange a marriage, anything to change destiny. For a time, it worked, or so he believed. One day, a stranger arrived in Sardis, a prince from Phrygia named Adrastus, a man haunted by tragedy. He had accidentally killed his own brother and sought purification. Croesus welcomed him, gave him shelter, gave him friendship, gave him trust. Then disaster arrived in the form of a monster. A massive wild boar began destroying crops across the countryside. Villagers begged the king for help. They begged him to send Atys. Croesus refused. He remembered the dream. He would not risk his son. But Atys argued. The prophecy spoke of a spear. This was a hunt. A boar was not a man. The danger seemed impossible. Finally, Croesus agreed. But he gave Adrastus a command. "Protect my son. Guard him with your life." The hunting party entered the mountains. Spears flew, men shouted, the boar charged, and in the chaos, Adrastus threw his spear. He missed the beast and struck Atys. The prince died instantly. The dream fulfilled. The prophecy complete. Croesus was destroyed. The richest man alive, now the poorest in spirit. His palace filled with mourning, his heart filled with regret. Adrastus could not bear the guilt. That night, at the prince's tomb, he took his own life. For 2 years, Croesus grieved. 2 long years of silence. 2 years of remembering Solon's words. No man can be called happy until he is dead. Then news arrived from the east. News that would change everything. A Persian prince named Cyrus had risen to power. He had overthrown the Median Empire. He was building something new, something dangerous, an empire. Croesus knew what this meant. Sooner or later, Lydia would be next. So Croesus turned to the most powerful voice of the ancient world, the Oracle of Delphi. He asked one question: if I go to war with Persia, will I succeed? The oracle answered, if Croesus goes to war, he will destroy a great empire. Croesus smiled. The prophecy seemed clear. Victory, glory, triumph. But prophecy is a dangerous thing, because it never tells you whose empire will fall. Croesus gathered his armies. Gold funded the campaign. Allies were summoned. Banners were raised. The richest king in the world marched to war. Across the plains of Anatolia, 2 destinies moved toward each other: Croesus of Lydia and Cyrus of Persia. Their first clash came near the river Halys, a brutal battle. Dust, steel, chaos. When the fighting ended, there was no clear victor. Winter approached. Croesus believed the war would pause until spring. He returned to Sardis, confident he had time. He sent his allies home. He relaxed his guard. He believed the campaign would continue later. He was wrong. Cyrus did the unthinkable. Instead of retreating for winter, he marched straight towards Sardis, fast, relentless, unstoppable. By the time Croesus realized the danger, the Persian army was already at his gates. The final battle began on the plains outside Sardis. Lydian cavalry charged. Their horses thundered across the battlefield. They were famous, feared, unmatched. Cyrus smiled. He had prepared for this. He ordered camels to the front lines. The unfamiliar smell terrified the horses. The mighty Lydian cavalry broke. Panic spread. Lines collapsed. The battle was over. Sardis fell soon after. The richest kingdom in the world was gone. Croesus was captured alive, a king without a crown, a man without a future. Cyrus ordered a great funeral pyre to be built. Croesus and 14 Lydian nobles were tied to the wood. The flames were lit. As the fire rose, Croesus whispered a name, Solon. Again, he whispered it, Solon, Solon. Cyrus heard him. He asked his translators, "What is he saying?" They told him the story of the wise man, of happiness, of fate, of the fall of kings. Cyrus listened in silence, watching the flames climb higher. Then something changed. Cyrus realized the truth. Today, Croesus. Tomorrow, anyone, even a king of Persia. He ordered the fire extinguished. Croesus was saved, his life spared, his kingdom gone. The richest man in the world became an advisor, a counselor, a reminder. And the words of Solon echoed across history. Call no man happy until he is dead. This was the lesson Herodotus carried across the ancient world, a lesson about power, about fate, about the fragile nature of human success. And this was only the beginning of his stories. Croesus now stood beside Cyrus, no longer a king, now a witness to the rise of a new empire. The Persian Empire expanded rapidly. City after city fell. Kingdom after kingdom disappeared. And Herodotus recorded it all as both history and warning. Because he noticed something strange. Every empire believed it was eternal right before it collapsed. Cyrus became known as King of Kings. His rule stretched across vast lands, from the Mediterranean borders to the edges of Central Asia. But Herodotus did not only write about conquest, he wrote about people, their customs, their beliefs, their strange and unfamiliar worlds. He described the Persians first, a people unlike the Greeks. They did not build statues for their gods. They worshipped on mountains, open to the sky, fire, sun, earth, wind. For them, nature was divine. They valued truth above almost everything. Lying was considered one of the greatest sins. Debt was equally shameful. They celebrated life with intensity. Birthdays were important events. Banquets were held with wine, music, and discussion. And Herodotus noticed something important. Even though they were powerful conquerors, they borrowed customs from others. Clothing from the Medes, armor from Egypt, ideas from many lands. They were not just destroyers of cultures, they absorbed them. After Persia, Herodotus traveled to Babylon, a city so large it seemed impossible. Massive walls, wide rivers, earring structures. A civilization built on engineering and order. He recorded strange customs there. Marriage markets where women were chosen in public auctions. Methods of caring for the sick by gathering advice in city squares. Dietary habits centered around fish, bread, and salt preparations. Some customs were shocking, some were practical, some were misunderstood, but all were recorded. Because Herodotus believed something simple. If a culture exists, it deserves to be remembered. Then came Babylon's fall. Cyrus used strategy instead of force. He redirected the Euphrates River, the water level dropped, and Persian soldiers entered the city through the riverbed. Babylon fell, another empire gone. But Cyrus's ambition did not stop there. He turned north, toward the nomadic tribes of the steppe, the Massagetai, a fierce and independent people. Their queen was Tomyris, a ruler who did not fear kings, not even the king of kings. Cyrus attempted deception. He left food and wine as a trap. The Massagetai attacked. They feasted, they drank, they became vulnerable. Then Persia struck. Victory seemed certain, but war is never simple. Tomyris' son was captured and later died. Grief turned into rage, and rage turned into war. The final battle was brutal. Chaos on open land, neither side willing to retreat. And in the end, Cyrus fell. The great conqueror, killed in battle. Herodotus writes that his body was recovered, and Tomyris, in a final act of vengeance, placed his head in a container of blood. A symbolic punishment, a message to the dead king. The rise and fall of Cyrus marked a turning point. Empires were not permanent, not even the greatest. And Herodotus understood this more than anyone, because he had now seen it with his own eyes. Kings rise, kings fall, stories remain. And so his journey continued, beyond Persia, beyond Babylon, toward Egypt once more, where even greater mysteries await. Herodotus returned to Egypt once again, but this time, he was not just a traveler, he was a collector of worlds. He listened more carefully, he questioned more deeply, he compared every story he had heard before. In Egypt, he found a civilization unlike any other, a society built entirely around the Nile. To the Egyptians, the river was not just water, it was life, it was order, it was the reason their civilization existed at all. Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile. And in this, he was right. Without the river, there would be no cities, no farming, no empire. He observed how deeply their culture differed from Greece. Men and women had reversed roles in many daily tasks. Religious rituals followed strict purity laws. Death was treated with extreme ceremony. Even everyday habits felt inverted. What Greeks did in public, Egyptians often did in private. What Greeks did with the left hand, Egyptians did with the right. Everything felt mirrored. But the most extraordinary part of Egypt was its obsession with death. Herodotus studied mummification in detail. He described 3 levels of preservation, each more expensive, more complex, more sacred than the last. The body was carefully prepared, organs removed, the brain extracted, the corpse cleansed with oils and spices, then dried in natron for 70 days. Finally, it was wrapped in fine linen and placed inside a carved wooden case shaped like a human body. To the Egyptians, this was not death. It was transformation. Herodotus also wrote about their animals: cats, dogs, crocodiles, birds. Even some creatures were treated as divine. When a cat died, families shaved their eyebrows in mourning. When a dog died, they shaved their entire body. To outsiders, this seemed strange. To Egyptians, it was natural. But Herodotus did not only observe customs, he also asked questions about nature itself. One of the greatest mysteries was the Nile. Where did it come from? Why did it flood? Some theories were logical, some were completely incorrect, but all were attempts to understand the unknown. Herodotus recorded them all, even the ones he did not believe, because to him, recording human thought was more important than correcting it. Eventually, Egypt revealed another story, a story of deception, power, and empire. The Persian king Cambyses, son of Cyrus, invaded Egypt, and like his father, he brought war with him. Egypt fell. Temples were closed. Sacred rituals were disrupted. The old order collapsed. But Cambyses was not satisfied with conquest. He wanted control over everything, even belief itself. He mocked Egyptian gods. He insulted their rituals. He tried to prove their religion meaningless. But Herodotus shows something important here. Power can destroy cities, but it cannot easily destroy culture. Even under Persian rule, Egyptian traditions survived, hidden, adapted, enduring. And this was another lesson Herodotus recorded. Empires do not erase identity, they only reshape it. After Egypt, Herodotus reflected on everything he had seen: war, wealth, religion, death, empire. Everywhere he went, the same pattern appeared: rise, expansion, pride, collapse. No civilization escaped it. Not Persia, not Lydia, not Babylon, not Egypt. And Herodotus began to understand something profound. History was not random, it was cyclical. And humans never truly learn. But they always remember stories. And that was his purpose: to preserve what others would forget, to record what others would ignore, to ensure that even fallen empires still had a voice. And so his histories became something greater than a book. They became a warning, a mirror, a memory of humanity itself. And the journey was not yet over. As Herodotus continued his travels beyond Egypt, his mind carried a growing realization. Every land he visited, every king he spoke about, every empire he recorded was connected by the same invisible thread: human ambition, human fear, human pride. In Persia, he saw empire built on conquest. In Babylon, civilization built on order. In Egypt, life built on the rhythm of nature. And in every place, he saw the same fragile truth: nothing lasts forever. Herodotus then turned his attention to Libya and the edges of the known world. Regions the Greeks spoke about with uncertainty, imagination, and exaggeration. He recorded tribes who lived in extreme climates, people who survived with minimal resources, societies shaped entirely by environment. Some were nomadic, some were settled, some were described in ways that blurred fact and myth. But Herodotus did not remove them, he included them. Because to him, even uncertain stories revealed how humans understood the world. From Libya, his accounts stretched toward Arabia, a land of deserts and rare resources, where trade routes connected distant civilizations like veins across the earth. He wrote about spices, incense, and valuable goods that traveled vast distances, goods that moved between cultures, linking east and west long before maps defined them. And then, toward India, a place almost unknown to the Greeks, described through second-hand accounts, traders, and distant travelers. Here, Herodotus recorded stories that sounded almost unbelievable. But again, he did not dismiss them. He preserved them. Because his goal was not to decide what was true, but to preserve what people believed to be true. And this is what made his work revolutionary. Before Herodotus, history was myth mixed with memory. After Herodotus, history became inquiry. He was the first to separate perspectives, the first to compare versions, the first to treat storytelling as investigation. But even Herodotus himself was not perfect. He sometimes repeated hearsay, sometimes accepted flawed explanations, sometimes confused geography or time. Yet his method was what mattered. He asked questions no one else asked. Eventually, Herodotus returned to Greece. But Greece itself was changing. The world he left behind was no longer the world he returned to. Cities had grown, tensions had increased, power shifted constantly between city-states, Athens and Sparta rising toward their own inevitable conflict. And Herodotus saw it clearly. The same patterns repeated everywhere. Competition, expansion, fear of rivals, war justified by memory. History was not just the past, it was behavior. Human behavior, repeating itself. So Herodotus began writing everything down. Not as a poet, not as a storyteller of myth, but as a witness. He compiled stories from across the known world into one work, a work that tried to explain why civilizations rise and why they fall. He called it the Histories. And in it, he preserved not only events, but voices. Persian voices, Greek voices, Egyptian voices, Babylonian voices. A world speaking through him. And when he finally presented his work to the Greek world, something remarkable happened. People listened, not because they agreed with everything, but because they recognized something new. A way of thinking, a way of questioning, a way of remembering. Herodotus had not just told stories, he had built a framework for understanding humanity. And as his journey came to an end, one truth remained above all others. Empires fall, kings die, but stories endure. And through stories, history never truly disappears. Herodotus had traveled across the known world. He had spoken to kings who believed they were gods, and to people who had never seen a king in their lives. And now, he saw everything from a distance, not as a traveler, but as a historian. Because distance changes perspective, and time reveals patterns. He had seen Persia rise from scattered tribes into the greatest empire the world had ever known. He had seen Lydia collapse under the weight of its own wealth. He had seen Babylon fall through strategy rather than strength, and Egypt bend but never fully break. Every empire believed itself unique, but Herodotus saw repetition, a cycle, always the same shape. Power rises, confidence grows, expansion begins, pride follows, and then collapse. Herodotus did not claim to know the will of the gods. He did not claim destiny was written in stone, but he observed something undeniable. Humans repeat their mistakes. Kings ignore warnings. Empires overextend. Leaders mistake strength for permanence. And history becomes the record of that mistake. He thought of Croesus, the richest man who lost everything. He thought of Cyrus, the greatest conqueror who still fell. He thought of Cambyses, a king who conquered Egypt but lost his reason. Each one powerful, each one temporary. And Herodotus realized something that few before him had understood. Greatness does not protect you from fate. It only makes your fall more visible. When he returned to Greece, he carried more than stories. He carried a warning. Athens was rising. Sparta was strong. Tension between Greek city-states was growing. And behind it all, the Persian Empire still loomed. The world he had documented was not finished. It was still moving, still changing, still repeating itself. Herodotus knew that another great war would come, and it did. The Greco-Persian conflicts would continue after his travels. History would not stop for him. But he had done something irreversible. He had preserved memory. He had turned spoken stories into written history. He had given future generations a way to understand the past. And most importantly, he had changed the question. Before Herodotus, people asked, what happened? After Herodotus, people asked, why did it happen? That single shift changed everything. Because once you ask why, you begin to see patterns. And once you see patterns, you begin to understand humanity. Herodotus spent his final years reflecting on everything he had seen. He did not present himself as perfect. He did not claim certainty. He often wrote, "This is what I was told," or "This is what I believe." He left space for doubt. And in doing so, he created something far more powerful than certainty. He created inquiry, a method that would survive thousands of years, a method that would become the foundation of history itself. And so his work ended, not with a conclusion, but with a continuation. Because history never truly ends. It only moves forward, carried by those who remember it. Empires will rise again. Kings will claim greatness again. Wars will be justified again. But so will the questions. And somewhere in every generation, there will always be someone asking, why? And that is the legacy of Herodotus, the man who traveled the world, not to conquer it, but to understand it.